Hello and welcome to Sacred Psychology, the podcast for misfits and mystics. Here, neuroscience and spirituality go hand in hand. Join me, Tamara Powell, on a no-holds-barred adventure outside the box, because that's where all the truly great shit happens anyway. Welcome back to Sacred Psychology. I'm your host, Tamara Powell, and today I am diving into the subjects of autism, asexuality, and social justice with an incredible human being, someone you are just going to love, I promise. Olivia James identifies as an autistic, asexual goofball who loves octopuses, cats, and rock climbing. Born and raised in the Great Midwest, she went to school at a small liberal arts college and in the process discovered that too much philosophy made her depressed. She kicked the ass of an eating disorder, adopted some kittens, and found her true calling as a marketer in a local nonprofit, while also writing, podcasting, and getting married on the side. When not working too much, Olivia can be found on bullet journal websites, listening to far too many podcasts, or playing a great deal of Dungeons and Dragons. This is one interview that I think is going to keep you pretty enthralled. So without further ado, I give you Olivia James. Hey, Olivia.
Well, hello.
Welcome to the show, girlfriend.
I am so excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you. Like I said before the show, I've been fangirling on your websites and I'm super excited about this conversation. So one of the biggest reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you have this component to you that I just think is so swoon-worthy of social justice. And you say on your website that you really want to come at social justice from the perspective of someone who's disabled, autistic, neurodivergent, and so tired.
Amen.
I think that speaks to a lot of souls out there.
Yeah. I've always had this passion for wanting to make the world a better place. And as I've learned more about myself, the role that I can take in social justice has become more and more clear. It's really interesting how the more I learn about myself, the more it's clear to me what I need to be doing for other people.
Oh, what an existential swoon already. You are hitting it out of the ballpark. I just melted a little. Yes, it's such a wonderful paradox that the more we have self-awareness, the more that I think our soul purpose just comes into play.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that said, I know you work for a nonprofit, but what really intrigues me is how you advocate for actually a few different passion areas. And so your blog site, which is so cheeky, I just love it, Out of Spoons.
I just rebranded and I'm so happy with that name. It makes me so
It is nerdy. Brilliant, darling. Brilliant. So you titled it in part because of the spoon theory. Can you tell our listeners who aren't familiar a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. It is a term that was coined by Christine Miserandino.
Mm-hmm.
And she is somebody who has, I believe it is multiple sclerosis, some sort of chronic illness. And she was at dinner with a friend and was trying to explain what it's like to have chronic illness. And the only thing that she had in front of her were spoons. So she grabbed a pile of spoons and said, every day I start out with this number of spoons. And everything that I do takes a certain number of spoons. I might have to take a shower and that takes 2 spoons. Going to work takes 5 spoons. So those are sort of the units of energy for her.
Yeah.
And when you have a chronic illness or a disability or a mental illness, those spoons go really fast. You start with a very limited number of spoons, whereas somebody who is able-bodied and neurotypical, you may never have to consider how many spoons you're using for something because the likelihood that you'll run out is almost 0. So when you run out of spoons, you literally have nothing left. You're running on empty. It's almost impossible to continue functioning or doing more things. And there's a lot more that I could go into about that because I think there's a lot of really interesting facets to that and how for different disabilities and in different circumstances, things can take more or less spoons, how you can replenish spoons, all of those sorts of things. But essentially, the idea is when you're out of spoons, you're just done.
Yes. So tired, right?
Yes.
I love that terminology because I think it is applicable to everyone. And I'm really picturing, all the moms I work with and the multi-passionate individuals that I work with. And then certainly a lot of my clients that have long-term chronic illnesses like dysautonomia or other autoimmune disorders, and certainly people on the autism spectrum. It's just, I'm just picturing now families running around going, you know what? I'm out of spoons. I'm out of spoons, people. I need a little extra care today. Please honor my space.
Yeah. And it's really nice to have that language where you don't have to say to somebody like, oh, I'm like, you don't have to tell them where you're at. You can just say no more spoons and they know immediately.
Right.
Yeah.
So take it, use it, love it, pass it on.
Exactly.
But I want to unpack something else that you kind of alluded to about the privilege, the inherent privilege for those of us who are considered neurotypical. How did you first, discover, I've read about your website, on your website, but how did you first discover that, hey, after therapist after therapist, that you saw, shit, maybe it's autism?
Well, so I got super lucky is the answer. I am a woman, which makes it much less likely that I will be diagnosed with autism.
Right.
And I also appear quite functional, which makes it incredibly unlikely that I will get diagnosed with autism.
Thank you for saying that, by the way. I hate to interrupt you, but I do think that's really important because so many people, even when I say, oh, I'm talking to a person who has autism tomorrow, they're like, instantly exactly what you put on your blog post of, oh, like the Rain Man, or how are you going to have a conversation with that person? So,
it turns out I can talk a lot and I like to talk a lot. Mm-hmm. Autism looks completely different in many different people. So the way that I actually came to autism was through my job. I work at an autism society, and I've always known that I wanted to do nonprofit work, and I applied there because they had a position that was relevant to me, and I started working there. I love it. And as I learned more about the diagnosis, as I was writing about it and, creating our materials and getting more involved with the organization, I was like, okay, some of these things sound a lot like me. Mm-hmm. They sound really a lot like me. Mm-hmm. And then I took our really in-depth course. It's this certification course for direct service providers, and it's a really good just crash course to autism. And I took that and was like, I need to talk to somebody about getting diagnosed.
Fantastic.
So I actually talked to one of our therapists at my work, and we didn't work closely together, so they felt comfortable doing the diagnosis for me. And it has been so amazing to have an explanation for why I struggle so much.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm so glad you said that, because as a therapist, I have a love-hate relationship with diagnosing.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm really big on there's an art and a science to it. And I hate that labels can be so sticky and hard to remove sometimes, as one of my favorite mentors has said. So I'm not about pathologizing, but more of what you just mentioned about how the explanation normalizes, and that alone can bring a big chunk of healing already, just to go, oh my God, I'm not fucking crazy. This is a thing.
Well, and the thing about autism in particular is that the treatment for autism is pretty different from a lot of mental illnesses.
Yes.
And I had been getting treated like I had a mental illness. I went to treatment for an eating disorder for quite a long time. I was treated for depression and anxiety. I took DBT and had a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder traits. Mm-hmm. And none of those really helped decrease the base level of anxiety that I felt every day.
Right.
Because none of them were getting at the fact that I felt uncomfortable and confused in almost every social situation, and that I was on sensory overload almost every single day, and that my executive functioning couldn't handle all of the stuff that I was trying to do, and I needed more supports around that. So getting the right diagnosis is so important in my mind, because it helps you understand what you need to be doing for yourself.
Right. And opens the door to the right resources then.
Yes.
Because while the other things help treat the symptoms, it's kind of like giving someone ibuprofen for a chronic brain tumor.
Exactly.
Okay, great. We cured your headache, but it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
Which brings me to another interesting point in a blog article of yours on awareness and acceptance and how we need both. Can you unpack a little bit about your passion for this? In that, I love this line though that you give. You say, I have a secret about human behavior for you. People will not accept your behavior unless they understand it. Acceptance relies on awareness. God, girl, that's beautiful.
Well, thank you. So within the autism community, there's a lot of debate about almost everything. We're very opinionated people, it turns out. And one of the places where people butt heads is around things like awareness campaigns. So, for example, Autism Speaks, which has its own problems, which we're not going to get into now, has the Light It Up Blue campaign, which is the idea of during Autism Awareness Month, you wear blue, or various organizations and buildings will turn their lights on blue or whatever to get people to learn about autism. And many people are like, well, what good does that do? Having people learn about autism doesn't get me the services and resources that I need. It doesn't help people to be more accepting of my behavior. You know, everybody knows autism exists. We don't need that anymore. And in my mind, that really misses the fact that awareness isn't just about saying autism exists and we should do something about it. It's about education. Awareness to me is giving everybody in the world the tools to accept other people.
Right.
Yeah, because like it would be great if you could just see somebody who's behaving differently from you and from the way that you expect and say, that's cool, I don't care. You can do you. But we don't act like that in reality.
No.
And sometimes activism has to be pragmatic instead of idealistic. And we may want other people to be able to accept us, whether they get us or not, but they're just not going to. And I try and balance those two pulls in my activism. I have that idealistic side where I want to say, like, I don't have to be polite to you. I don't have to educate you. I don't have to tell you all of these reasons why you should respect me. You just should, because I'm a human being. But on the other hand, I also want to be effective. And so I want to prioritize things that will get a result. And oftentimes those are doing things that you don't really want to do and you maybe shouldn't have to do, like spending a lot of time educating, putting up with a lot of insults and crabby people, focusing on awareness rather than acceptance. So there's kind of that push and pull, I think, in all activism. And I don't think we need to pick one or the other. I think we can have both.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I am over here with my cheerleading pom bombs. You can't be saying, you're like, yes, so much. Yes. And so many great tweets. You are a very tweetable person.
Why, thank you.
Advocacy needs to be pragmatic and not just idealistic. Hallelujah. Yes. Take me to church. That is so true. And what
I feel like my life motto is just, why not both?
Thank you.
You know?
That's my life motto. I was just about to say that. You took the words right out of my mouth.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you did, because now I just get to be the backup girl, the woo girl going, yeah, like Lil Jon over your shoulder. What she said. I don't work with too many autistic people, but the same principles apply with whatever we are advocating for. So in my niche population, that's often gender and sexual identity. Same rules apply. It is annoying for a lot of my clients to have to educate their loved ones or friends or people on the street even about their whatever their fill in the blank issue is. However, that is how change happens.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're not just giving people permission, but kind of pushing them, lighting a fire under their ass. We need to keep both. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. It's not fair, but it's still going to lead to a better world. Like, you shouldn't have to have the responsibility of being an advocate, whether you want to or not, but you've been given the opportunity to be an advocate simply by existing as somebody who's different.
Yep. Amen. So can we add on to that then? Because that brings me to a really high correlation between autism and asexuality.
Interestingly, a really high correlation between autism and all sorts of sexual and gender divergences. Yeah. We tend not to fit into the norm, unsurprisingly.
I was going to say, go figure.
Yeah.
Yes. And you have another, I think probably one of my top 5 favorite things I've ever read on the internet. Blog articles.
You're making me blush over here.
Well, that's all right. Embrace it. You have a blog article called That's Not What Asexual Means. And I got to tell you, as someone who, this is one of my niche areas, working with the gender and sexual rainbow spectrum, all the things, probably one of the most misunderstood topics.
Yes.
So for the millions of people who will hopefully hear this, can you explain what asexual means from someone who's living it?
Absolutely. So being asexual means that you do not experience sexual attraction. That seems like it's very straightforward, but it's probably not exactly what you're thinking.
No, it's not. Not at all.
So sexual attraction is that urge that you might feel when you see somebody to touch them or be physical and sexual with them.
I call it the urge to merge.
Yeah. It's not romantic attraction. It's not love. And it's not necessarily a libido either. So you can be asexual and have sex. You can be asexual and be married. I, in fact, am. Mm-hmm. You can be asexual and have relationships. And really all it means is that you don't have that immediate pull to be physical with another person. There are a whole bunch of different varieties. So there's a whole spectrum of asexuality. Demisexuality is one example where you don't feel like you want to be sexual with someone until you know them very closely on an emotional level. And that one is greatly misunderstood. Many people think that that's just being normal, but if you look at a celebrity and think, "Ooh, that's hot. I want to tap that." You're not asexual.
Nope. Nope. Or even demisexual.
Yeah. And I personally identify as somewhere in the gray asexual spectrum. So I do feel sexual attraction sometimes, but it's pretty unpredictable for me. And it kind of comes and goes, and I have a really hard time understanding when it's going to be there and when it won't.
Right. And so I am sure that you have encountered that pushback from a lot of people of like, why the hell do we even need all these different labels and identifications?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
What do you say to those people?
Well, I like labels personally. I collect them. It irritates some people, but I am a very literal thinker, and I like to have ways of placing myself and understanding myself in the world. Mm-hmm. I think that labels are as useful as you make them. You can either get a label and decide that's all I am, or you can get a label and decide that's the start of where I am. And for me, having that label is a great way to connect with other people who are similar to myself, to have a better understanding of myself. So like with autism, it made me feel less broken to have this label and understanding of myself. I didn't think that I was just bad at being allosexual, which is people who have sexual attraction. I was actually just asexual. I also think that they are really helpful for advocating for yourself. So if you need to be treated differently or you need different accommodations, I think labels are incredibly helpful for that.
Right.
And they're also just not hurting anybody.
I agree.
Like,
I don't know why people care so much.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm so sorry that you have to remember something, but you remember people's names all the time and you don't seem to get upset about that. So you can remember my sexuality.
Exactly. I think language is so powerful, but it is also limited. It's another paradox. Yeah. And so it is withholding of the power that you give it, pretty much. So yeah, I really echo what you just said. There's this interesting pushback, especially from the conservative right, about how our country is basically just becoming pussified, I've heard, where we're just, overly sensitive and too politically correct. And there's this weird idea about how we are actually contributing to the problems by allowing for people to advocate for themselves and for other people, which I find fascinating.
I like to play a game, which is whenever somebody uses the phrase politically correct, replace it with being kind and respectful.
Right?
Because that's what being politically correct is.
I was just going to say, where does kindness ever get us, in the wrong spot?
Yeah. And it is also very funny to me that the conservative right tends to say that all these special snowflakes are so sensitive. If you look at some of the reactions to, for example, Star Wars: The Last Jedi,
but you also have a great blog on.
Yeah. I can promise you that these people are also pretty sensitive about some not that important things.
Whew, well said. Well said. So, Olivia, when we're talking about advocating for ourselves and for other people, where do you first recommend people start with? If they're trying to get involved, what are some ways that they can become more aware as human beings?
Man, okay, that is a big question.
It is.
Yeah. So I think that in my mind, one of the most important things when you're approaching advocacy is to remember that there is no one correct way to do it. There are literally thousands of things that you could do that will improve the world. And so once again, this is where I'm going to go back to that. Learning about yourself will help you improve the world. You want to think about what your skills and interests are. So there's a reason that I do most of my advocacy around mental health, autism, and asexuality. And that's because those are the things that I'm really passionate about and that I know a lot about. So if there's something that really captures your interest and that makes you fired up and makes you want to talk about it, that's probably the best place to start. The other thing,
agree. Stay curious. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries.
Don't be afraid to go with what is an automatic interest of yours.
Yeah.
Which may typically, even for us therapists, be something from personal life experience. There's pushback on that even in our career field about, oh my God, what if people think that I'm a wounded healer? And I say it's very difficult to learn from someone who hasn't lived it.
Amen.
So, it could actually be your strength. As they say, your mess is your message, if you will allow it to be. So that's one of my favorite things about you is that you're right out in the open with it.
I think the best thing to do with our biases is to own them, If there's no such thing as objectivity. So if I try and go out and say, like, I'm going to be totally objective about autism and asexuality and all these other things, that would be a lie. I would much rather go forward and say, here's where I'm coming from. This is my perspective, and this is why I care. I think it's way more powerful and way more honest.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was going to say is that there's also sort of a lot of media that you can use in your activism. Are you the type of person that likes public speaking? Are you the type of person that likes writing? Are you the type of person that likes volunteering? All of those are avenues through which you can become involved. And once you have kind of decided what is really speaking to you as a format, then you can start trying to figure out where you can plug in, whether that's through a local organization, creating a blog or a podcast, going to rallies and marches, organizing events. There's so many ways that you can get involved.
Yeah, I think people really get too narrow-minded when they think social justice and they think advocacy. They think about like the Selma March or having to picket, or right now here in Pensacola, feminism is taking a huge leap forward, which is amazing, but people assume that they need to stand in with like the Handmaiden Society on the street, and that's not at all the only way. I love that you're really highlighting the fact that it can even be behind the scenes for all the introverts listening.
Absolutely.
Show up and knit hats for babies in the NICU.
So I'm going to be a big nerd for a minute. One of the terms that people like me often get labeled with is a social justice warrior.
Yeah.
I prefer to think that I am a social justice cleric. If you don't play D&D or any sort of role-playing game, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But
unpack it for the non-nerds listening.
Yes, but there are a variety of different classes. You can sort of specialize in different things when you're playing these types of games. You might be the warrior, who is the sort of front lines person who's out there taking all the hits, or you might be the cleric who stands behind and heals everybody and gives them strength to go out and do what they need to do. You might be the bard who inspires everyone and says these rousing, powerful words. There's all sorts of different ways to contribute. And so I like to think about, what class do I want to be when I am engaging in social justice? And none of them are wrong. You could just be the healer who stays behind and, talk somebody through their emotions once they come back from that really difficult rally. That's just as important.
Nerdgasm. Love it. And sometimes when you are multi-passionate like myself, you may cycle through all three and give yourself permission to.
Yeah.
It kind of just depends upon the day and my mood. So one other fascination I have for you, I feel like this interview is like Tam's fascination with Olivia and her different streams.
I feel so famous.
Good. Thank God you've got a great sense of humor and are letting me follow all of my wanderings. But you have this other saying on your website that too much philosophy made you depressed. And the existentialist in me is dying to go there. So what happened to you in college?
Oh, man. So round about my senior year of high school, I took my first philosophy class. Okay, this is going to be such a long story. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. No, I'm dying. So tell me.
Let's go back a little bit further. I am a very literal thinker, and I like rules, and I like concrete answers. This goes along with autism in a lot of ways. So for most of my life, school and education were my number one priority, and I viewed knowledge as my number one value. It was the most important thing to me, and it was the only thing that I thought mattered. Sure. And so I was very concerned with finding the truth. And I felt like whenever I could find truth about something, I had some kind of control over it. Cue philosophy.
Yeah. Woo.
Philosophy was like,
fuck
can
that.
I swear? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Philosophy was like, fuck you. There are no answers. Mm-hmm. Truth doesn't exist. And my mind was just blown. This was happening at the same time as a bunch of other unfortunate things, but
as is always the case.
Of course, but that's when I first started to develop a really bad eating disorder. And so in conjunction with the eating disorder, I spent a lot of time concerned with, well, why am I even here? Why do I bother to get up in the morning? What am I aiming for? And I couldn't answer that question because philosophically, I am pretty much a nihilist. I don't even know if I can prove that anything exists except for me.
Sure.
Whatever, it's fine. Mm-hmm. But when you're 18 and for your whole life, it's been so important to you to make an actual measurable difference in the world, that is incredibly painful. And so I actually got a degree in philosophy and religion because I was just consumed with trying to figure out what's the point.
Right.
And that was a very unhealthy obsession for me.
Sure.
Eventually I had to say, it doesn't matter. I can't think about that anymore. I have to think about here and now. I have to practice some mindfulness instead of constantly be trying to take the perspective of the entire universe, which is kind of impossible to do on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. A lot of people, when they do philosophy, they're like, oh, this doesn't affect people in their day-to-day lives. And I just laughed at them because I was like, yes, it does. I spend every day sitting there thinking about, why am I doing this homework when in the vast cosmic scale, I am a tiny blip in the universe and will never affect anything. I was really fun to be around in college.
I bet.
So fun.
Don't bring Olivia to the party.
Yeah.
Sit in the corner judging everyone. What's the fucking point?
Exactly.
So shallow and mindless.
So yeah, I wouldn't say, when I'm being serious about it, I wouldn't say that philosophy caused my depression, but it certainly didn't help. I think my tendency to think in a very philosophical way and to be full of myself for a minute, I was quite good at philosophy. I really enjoyed it.
Sure. I bet you could argue you would either be the person I'd want on my group project, because I actually minored in philosophy and religion, which is part of my fascination with you with this, or you'd be the person I want to stay far away from.
That does sound like me.
Yeah.
And so my ability to really dive deep into it and understand some of these really complex and often terrifying ideas was not that great for me.
Sure. So now what's interesting to me is that you are this social justice cleric. There's a big, still philosophical existential component to that.
Yes, absolutely. Ethics is actually like my favorite branch of philosophy, and it always has been. And it's still pretty important to me to think about the ethical consequences of what I'm doing. I just don't spend quite as much time poking at sort of the abstract pieces of it. I try to keep myself a little bit more grounded. So
yes, which is my favorite. Unless we're just sitting around by a campfire with a glass of wine, I think the practicality is where it's at. So I meant to throw my cats out of the room before I started recording, but they were sleeping and being super adorable. So I was like, no, you can stay. And now they are like headbutting my mic and falling off my desk and stuff. So it's fine.
I apologize for any weird noises.
It's all good. We've had dogs barking. It's fine.
Yeah.
Kids. life happens even while we're podcasting.
True facts.
So I am totally swooning about this idea of how, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you have come around full circle and brought the existential philosophical quandary back into your work. And you're kind of dovetailing them at this point.
That's super interesting. I have not thought that much about it recently.
You're welcome for that mindfuck for later.
Thank you. Let me just go talk to my therapist now.
Right.
It's really interesting to me because when I internalize a value, it becomes so much like bedrock that I don't even think about it. That was one of the things that was challenging for me with my eating disorder, was once I had internalized eating less is the right thing to do, it was like nothing could shake that belief. That was just the way things were. And
Which
so
is how all human being psyches work. So
yes,
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that I've really I've always cared about helping other people, but I think I've really internalized this. I need to be doing something to improve the world as a whole. And so I don't even consider it anymore. It's not something that I think about, but I suppose it is. Yeah, I suppose it is philosophical. I've already reached the conclusion, I suppose.
I just think it's lovely because for me, after my wanderings through comparative religions and philosophy and nihilism, came to the point where if whatever the belief is, whatever the ism, whatever the religious worldview is, if it's not allowing you to become a better person and a better neighbor to your fellow humans, there's no point in it.
Yeah, I think the important thing for me was actually tightening my perspective, which seems weird. But when you're looking at things from the perspective of all of time and space, nothing matters. When you're looking at things from the perspective of the life that I'm living right now in conjunction with these other human beings, everything matters.
I love that. I just got the visual of like a guitar player tightening the strings. You make more beautiful music that way.
Yeah.
Not too tight, though. Don't crack.
Yep.
There is a beautiful
You don't
balance.
want to bring it in just to yourself. You want it to be just big enough that you're seeing the effects of your actions.
Swoon. You've given me so many swoons today. Thank you so much for that.
You're so welcome.
The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is your incredible, super serious social justice podcast.
Yay! I spent all morning doing marketing for my podcast. So I'm like, yay, let's talk about it.
Yes, let's talk about it. Your tagline, just 3 bitches in a basement. Love it. Yep. So what you said, 3 bitches in a basement, love to talk about.
Yes. So this is a podcast that I host with my friends, Courtney and Brianne, who are amazing, wonderful, glorious humans. And we started this podcast because we all wanted to get into the medium and we're like, what do we all care a lot about? We all care about social justice. What else do we all care about? Talking about butts and farting a lot. So we combined our 2 loves into this beautiful podcast.
Just super serious.
Yes. Essentially, we want to be able to make social justice a little bit more accessible. There are so many places where people get really argumentative about social justice, where it immediately turns into yelling and name calling and just like staking out your camps and never talking to each other. And so many places where it's really overwhelming how serious it is because, there is a lot of social justice that is pretty heavy.
Right.
And we wanted to make it a little bit more welcoming to people because whether you're somebody that's just not that interested because I'm not into politics, or you're somebody that's like, I would never be into social justice. No, that's for those liberals over there.
Mm-hmm. Hugging the trees.
Yeah. There's something there for you. And I think that no matter who you are, you can understand and feel some affinity for the idea that we should be nice to other people. And at its root, that's what I think social justice is about, is taking care of each other. So that's the kind of stuff we like to talk about. We like to be very silly. We have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And
like the best kind of people.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
So where can people find you, hang out with you?
Yeah, so Super Serious Social Justice is on iTunes. You can subscribe to us there. We also have a website, sssjcast.com. I enunciate so much when I'm saying this because otherwise it just turns into...
I like it.
We are on Twitter and Instagram at SSSJcast, and also on Pinterest. We create a board with pins with all of the references from each of our episodes. So if you're interested in learning more about any of the topics that we touch on, you can find us on Pinterest at Super Serious Social Justice, and also on Facebook.
Way to set the bar high. Damn, girlfriend. I'm like, I haven't checked my Pinterest in a hot minute. Yeah, that's a good fire to my ass.
It's really helpful. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Olivia. This has been so delightful.
Yes, it was fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Psychology Podcast. I pray you found some inspiration and empowerment to go out and make this life the most fulfilling possible. You can follow Sacred Psychology on Facebook and YouTube. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Tag us on social media and let us know what you think as well. Please note that the information provided is not meant to convey professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you could use such services, I highly recommend seeking them out from someone you trust. To get in touch with me personally or to see how we might work together, please check out ariatherapy.com or talesfromatrapezoid.com. Until next time, everyone.